I think for me, creativity is all about connections of finding links between different areas. So uh, I think especially where you've got sort of two different domains of knowledge, and then sort of see that link between the two, and that for me is creativity.
And being an academic and also an entrepreneur, how do you synthesize the two? You know, were you already an entrepreneur before you became an academic, or did it derive from your academic thoughts and perspectives?
So my academic career was in research physics. So I was doing experimental physics, and so the creativity side of things was always sort of under the surface in terms of experimental design. And basically, when you're in a lab, you're constantly solving problems. That's just spent for my PhD 3 years solving problems. You fix something one day and it's broken the next day, and just having to be sort of very creative with that. And so I wasn't at the time specifically thinking about being creative, but I think for me, since as a kid, I relish problem solving and just trying to find very creative ways around, which is, I think, one of the reasons which has drawn me to become a magician as well, because magic's all about solving problems. It's just the only difference is you don't explain how you do things.
Right, right. So how have you been able to synthesize the two worlds, you know, the world of academia and the world of entrepreneurship? And also, I know that you're an educator. So, you know, these three domains, they each have their own distinct cultures. And how do you synthesize these different cultures?
So one of the challenges is, with not actually being attached anymore to a formal education establishment, I'm not getting any payment for doing any research or sort of learning and studying. And so one of the challenges that comes from that is finding time in my diary to actually do the research, to do the reading, because there's always another job that's got a paycheck attached to that. And so sort of finding that balance, that I think there's a danger sometimes that you particularly when you're running a sort of a business, is that your output starts to exceed your input. And I think if you're going to be creative, you need to make sure that your input, what you're reading, what you're studying, what you're going out to watch and discover, is much greater than what you're giving out. Because if you don't, you're eventually going to run dry, both sort of physically, sort of emotionally, spiritually, and also in terms of your creative ideas. There's only so long you can sort of survive just on old ideas. Quite often, if you're investing in being creative, the returns might come 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 years down the line, and so you're not seeing that immediate return. Quite often when you're investing in creativity, what you're investing in is 99 dead ends and 1 success. And so again, the returns can seem like you're basically throwing money at a scheme, a person, an institution, and you're just getting sort of failed results. Whereas actually, we know to innovate, you have to explore the sort of territory before you, and a lot of that is coming across dead ends or interesting sort of sidelines which don't have an immediate application. So I think, for one, it's that you don't see an immediate return. 2, you don't have 100% success with that. I think also, and this might be a British culture thing, that we've traditionally been creative when our backs have been against the wall. And we keep on harping back to sort of, how creative we were during the Second World War, and sort of all this sort of schemes and the sort of the technology and the strategy and stuff. And that's fine, but most of the time our backs aren't against the wall. And I think that makes us sort of lazy and a bit complacent as well. And you need to be constantly investing, rather than just the times when you just find yourself in a crisis. We sort of have this sort of British culture, that almost a little bit arrogance, that we can work our way out of a problem with minimal resources, with just by thinking our way out.
education, in compulsory education, there's so little scope for creativity, because as you say, creativity doesn't, it leads to, there's 99 dead ends for one success story. So a teacher who is being observed or needs to get students through exams, for example, will focus on those aspects of the curriculum that will produce tangible outcomes, tangible results, whereas the creativity requires so much time, and a lot of it can, to the observer, can seem to be wasted time if students don't come up with a tangible, you know, evidence-based product.
Yeah, and also in particularly in a teaching environment, when you're facing those dead ends, it it can seem like complete failure. And we often, across our culture, both in education and in the business world, we sort of vilify failure. And there's a real fear of getting things wrong. We see it in schools with exams. It's all about getting the right answer. And we see it in business world. If you come up with an idea and it goes wrong, then that's your promotion gone. That's potentially your job gone. And so we naturally fear getting things wrong. And therefore we just keep our heads down. And we know from experience, we learn from mistakes and getting things wrong. Sort of kids learn to walk by basically falling over, and falling over is just controlled walking or controlled falling. And I think we almost need to embrace the fact that things aren't going to be perfect. Things are going to go wrong, and we can learn from that.
Talking about education, when people are marking these exams, I've heard examiners say, well, sometimes they've read an answer which was a really good answer, but it wasn't the right answer. It wasn't on their criteria. So they had to mark it as wrong, although it was, you know, it was perfectly.
It's painful, isn't it? Yeah. And I think also we prize answers, and specifically the answer, whereas a much better skill, in my belief, is the ability to question rather than the ability to give answers. A good question is far more powerful than 10 good answers. And what would be really interesting in terms of exams is completely flip them around. Rather than students have to give answers at the end of their time of study, is to be basically given some information, some source material, and then give 3 good questions they want to follow up. And basically you're assessing them on the ability to question rather than the ability to give answers.
That is just such an important point that you've made, Matt, because research shows that in education, teachers are usually the only ones who ask questions. It's like usually about 30 to 1. The teachers will ask 30 questions to 1 question from the student. We don't teach students how to generate good questions, as you say. They are always put in that position of like finding the right answer, but not a really kind of generative question, question that stimulates, a question that challenges, that leads to innovation, that leads to creativity.
And some of the reading I've been doing at the moment is showing that, particularly when you look at 4 or 5-year-olds and you measure their intelligence, their IQ, and you measure their sort of curiosity, curiosity is a much better predictor for their success 10 years down the line and into the rest of their lives than their general sort of intelligence levels. And the sad thing for me, and I've got a daughter who's going into school in September, is that a lot of schooling squashes that curiosity. And some of that is just the pressures of teaching, because you've got a big curriculum to get through, and you've got things to, attainments to achieve, boxes to tick. And the kid that keeps on asking questions slows down the rest of the class's learning and can become a real annoyance to the teacher, and they sort of then squash that spirit and get them to conform.
Absolutely. There is research to show, it's quite old research, Jackson and Gretzel in the 60s. But I still think that it's valid now. Their research showed that teachers prefer students who score highly on intelligence as opposed to those who score highly on creativity, for the very reasons that you just mentioned, that those who are highly creative, they can be annoying because they're always asking questions. They don't do what the teacher says, they do things their own way.
Yeah.
Whereas those who score highly on the intelligence scale, they know what the teacher wants. So they're clever in providing the answers that are being sought by the teacher, you know, and their values tend to match with each other.
Yeah.
Which is sad, isn't it? It's sad for those, you know, for those children who are high on that spectrum of creativity, who are highly curious.
And also, I think it's sad for the kids who might not have a natural sort of, however you define IQ, then they're forced into the system. Whereas actually, if you can have this intrinsic motivation for learning, then I think that'll stand them in a better stead for the future as well. So I think having a more curiosity-led rather than information-led education system will benefit both for the sort of top end and all the way down to the sort of bottom end as well. But of course, the real challenge is sort of, particularly in the sort of lower performing end, is to try and inspire or cultivate that curiosity, especially when sometimes their home environments will be sort of squashing that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that leads me to this question about motivation. A lot of teachers express frustration that, oh, my students just aren't motivated. And of course, students are motivated. They're not motivated perhaps to learn what the teacher's expecting them to learn.
Yeah.
But there isn't the scope to find out what they are motivated to learn and to teach them that, because there's the curriculum to get through.
Yeah, because you see some kids who just not interested in school, but you ask them on a topic that they're interested in, sort of football, computing, whatever, and suddenly they have this wealth of knowledge and some real interesting insights as well. And it's just because their motivation is sort of channeled down that direction.
Their motivation isn't aligned with the school curriculum, as it were, but you know, they have to pass their exams. So even though teachers might tap into what they are really interested in, they can't spend precious resources on cultivating that, because they'll lose their job because they won't pass their exams.
Mm-hmm.
So Matt, for you, why is creativity important? So for your daughter, who's soon going to be going into school, what would you expect teachers to do to cultivate and to help her to develop her creativity skills?
I think one of the key things is creating this environment where it's safe to ask questions and it's safe to make mistakes. I think if you ask anyone to reflect on what has in the past sort of knocked their curiosity, creativity, it's usually because they've done something wrong and they've been humiliated because of that, whether that is a sort of an authority figure, whether that is their peer group. And I think a key thing for the classroom is to have that environment where it is safe to ask questions, and quite often, as we know, sometimes the silliest questions are also the most profound questions, and just to sort of make space for that, but also that when you do make mistakes, when you do go down those 99 dead ends that we talked about earlier, that's okay too, and that should be celebrated as well. So a safe environment. I think for creativity, stories are really important as well, of hearing stories of people who've been creative in the past, because not only can we learn and be inspired from that, but we also again know that these big heroes of ours do make mistakes as well, and they've kept them going, and that can sort of build resilience as well, knowing that you don't give up after the first time or the second time, and you just sort of keep going.